Hi, welcome back to a Little Women Holiday series. This is video number 5 of a total of 6. If this is your first time here, my name is Laura Ingalls Gunn. Today we're going to be talking about Hannah. And if you're not familiar with Hannah, she was the cook and maid for the March household. And she is a very loving character, and the family treats her more like a family member than they do a servant. And she certainly is devoted to the family. She remained with them even after they lost their fortune caring for the 4 March sisters. And we know that Hannah is, of course, working class, and she is of Irish descent. And I'm always drawn to immigrant characters, thinking about what their lives were before they came to America and what they did afterwards, and certainly what they would have worn to go about their day-to-day activities. I've also always been drawn to that aspect. And so in thinking about Hannah, one article of clothing that is associated with her in several different passages in the book is her apron. Now today we are going to be sewing an apron that is in the half style, which means it is a simple waistband and then a gathered rectangle. Several of you have written to me that you are new to sewing and would like an easy project, and aprons along with pillowcases are some of the best projects that you can sew as a new sewist. Indeed, when I work with the Girl Scouts who are earning their merit badges, we often will sew aprons together. And the beauty of aprons is they go together very quickly. I can make an apron from start to finish in about an hour, and that's even including a pocket on my apron. Now that, of course, is sewing the apron on a sewing machine, but you can absolutely very easily sew them by hand as well. It's a little bit of an overcast day, so I have set up my sewing machine in the kitchen, which has lots of nice natural light. And of course, I believe that one of the most important tools that you can use in sewing is an iron and ironing board. So we'll be definitely spending a little bit of time doing that as well. So before we get started sewing our apron, I just wanted to read a quick passage that features Hannah in her apron, and it is from chapter 18, Dark Days. As if waked by the stir, Hannah started out of her sleep, hurried to the bed, looked at Beth, felt her hands, listened at her lips, and then, throwing her apron over her head, sat down to rock to and fro, exclaiming under her breath, "The fever's turned, she's sleepin' natural, her skin's damp and she breathes easy. Praise be given. Oh my goodness me." And that just really encompasses the spirit of Hannah, that she was so devoted to the girls that when Beth was recovering from scarlet fever and the fever finally broke, Hannah was probably the most overjoyed. So let's go ahead and go into the other room and start sewing Hannah's checked apron. This is the half apron style that we're going to be working on, and as you can see, you can make this apron any size that you want to. And it basically just consists of a rectangle of fabric that's gathered up and then joined to another rectangle of fabric that makes up the waistband. And if you want to add pockets, it is just another rectangle. So you're working with rectangles. And so of course these little doll aprons, this one is sized for an American Girl doll, which is an 18-inch doll. This is a perfect project for kids to do. A little bit older, because of course if they are sewing with a needle, they'll need to take a little bit care. But you know, I work with children usually around 8 is when I start them on a sewing machine. But of course that's up to you and what you want to do. And here is like another style, which is more, it hits mid-thigh and is perfect for housework and cleaning. And then once you master that basic shape, you can then go on to create other details. Now this is an apron. Because I sew so much, I have a lot of scraps, and I love the idea of patchwork. And even, you can see, even the ties are made from joining scraps of fabrics together. So if you have some favorite fabrics, you can just keep joining various rectangles until you get a longer, larger apron. And I'll show an image of me wearing this with this dress. So in terms of measurement, you don't really need a pattern for an apron. And you just mainly have to decide, do you want a long or a short apron? So this is 2 yards of fabric that I found at a thrift store. And I thought it would be a print that would have been available in the 1860s. Checked aprons were extremely popular. And women of that era, they would want to have covered as much of their skirts as they could. And on this fabric, you can kind of see there's a selvage edge, meaning that it's finished. Now, if I hold my fabric the full length, meaning a full 2 yards, and hold it up to my waist, that is pretty long. Like, it goes all the way down to the ground for me. But I need a waistband. So the very first thing that I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and take the fabric that I need for a waistband. And I like to take a 4-inch wide strip of fabric. And the reasoning is you're going to be folding the 4 inches in half. So that gives you about 2 inches of a waistband. But then I also then have a 1/2 inch seam allowance on either side. So then your waistband really is only about 1.5 inches wide, which that is the width that I prefer. If you want something more slender, skinny, you can definitely say take 3 inches of fabric. If you want a little bit of a wider waistband, you can do 5, 6 inches. But I'm gonna start with 4 inches of fabric. That is what I normally do. And for me, the quickest way when I'm doing this is just to rip my fabric. Kind of sounds horrible, akin to fingernails on a chalkboard. But why I like tearing my fabric, and this is a cotton fabric, I should stipulate that you cannot tear all fabrics, but a cotton fabric you can, is because fabric is made up of threads that are warp and weft, and when you tear your fabric, it gets it right on a straight edge, and it goes real quick, as you just saw. So first things first, is this going to be long enough? Now, I like longer ties on my waistband. So what I'm going to need to do is create a second strip of fabric, and we'll be joining those two together. So I'm going to come over here and I'll take another 4 inches of fabric. Alright, so again, we just make a snip with our scissors and then we just tear. And that tears it right on the grain so that when you sew it and then have a need to wash it, sometimes if you cut fabric not on the grain, then it's going to get very lopsided. So by tearing it, you're going to get it right on the grain. Okay, so now I have the pieces that I need for my waistband. And I'm holding it up again, and actually now with that 8 inches torn off, this is perfect for me lengthwise. Okay, so I have my long rectangular piece, I have my short rectangular piece, and this is going to become my pocket. This is completely optional. You don't have to put on a pocket. I just like to have a pocket because when I'm wearing my apron, it's the perfect place to tuck in my keys or a phone. And then lastly is our waistband pieces. And you may need only one piece for a waistband. I wanted it a little bit longer. Now, when you tear fabric, it can curl up. And I want it smooth. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go in and iron all of these pieces smooth, and I'm gonna cut off, there's a few little strings that always occur when you're tearing fabric. So I'm gonna go and iron and clean up my fabric pieces. I pressed all of the pieces out, and now I'm ready to start constructing the apron. And the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to want to hem 3 edges of the apron. And so that's each of the sides and then one where the hem is going to be. And make sure when you are hemming the sides of your apron, you go ahead and fold in the fabric and fold it in again so that the rough edge is all enclosed before you stitch this down. But make sure that you're doing it on the same side. On more than one occasion, I have one edge going one way and the other edge going another way, and you have to rip out one of those edges. So just pay attention. And I normally sew down the sides first, and then I hem the bottom. Some people do it all in one shot. It's up to you, but let's go ahead and hem up these sides. Both sides of the apron have been hemmed, and now I'm just going to repeat the process down on the bottom, and this is going to create the hem of the apron. And I do like to press out all my seams once I have finished sewing them. This gives it a nice crisp finish. Now, for those of you who do not have sewing machines, I will link down below in the description box a few tutorials on hand hemming, and there is the section on the waistband that I always hand hem, which you'll see me doing that. So you don't have to use a machine. You can absolutely do this by hand. Our large rectangle is now hemmed on 3 sides. And up the top where the waistband is going to go, that has not been hemmed. You don't need to hem this. Now this happens to be a selvage edge, so you can kind of see that the weave is very smooth here. But if your fabric is a little bit frayed looking, that's fine, no problem. Our next step is we are going to run 2 rows of gathering stitches. And gathering stitches are just stitches that are set very wide apart. Now you can kind of see, let's see if I can get in close. These are fairly small stitches. I have my machine set at 2.6, and then for gathering stitches, I'm going to set the machine at 5. So let me show you how I do that. If the light is on the top, that means it's just a simple straight stitch, and then I push down to get the stitch width, and then I'm just going to advance it. 5 is as high of a width that my machine will go. So let me go ahead and run 2 rows of gathering stitches, and I'll show you what that looks like. So this is 2 rows of gathering stitches, and this is generally a 1/4 of an inch from the edge, and this is about 1/2 an inch from the edge. And you can kind of see that those stitches are a little bit wider when you compare them to the stitches that we used for hemming. And let me pull back. So you're going to leave some long tails when you finish sewing the gathering stitches. And we don't back stitch on this. We leave it just unback stitched. We always back stitch on our hem stitches so they don't unravel or come apart, but these are just loose, and it's gathering stitches are exactly what they sound like. When you pull the top 2 and you have your 2 bottom from the bottom, you also have 2 threads from your bobbin, but if you pull the top 2 threads and just push it along, this is how you're going to gather your fabric to your waistband. Okay, can you see that? There we go. You just slide it along gently, very gently. You never want to force it and break the threads, but that is also why I always do 2 threads, because if one breaks, then I still have 1 functioning thread that I can pull to gather the fabric. And you're just going to keep doing that to fit your waistband. So, and if you gather too tightly, you just reverse the action. You just smooth your fabric out gently. So of course the next thing that we need to do is prepare our waistband. Is a good time to mention that if you want to add the optional pocket,
It's best to do it before the apron is gathered. And for an adult, I normally place the pocket around 4.5 inches down from the edge that is going to be your waistband. And then you can see the line that I've ironed. This indicates the center of the apron. So for this, it's about 6.5 inches in from the center. And with plaids, it's always nice if you can match up the different lines. And I did go ahead and hem the 3 edges just like we did the apron, and then the top I added a little bit of lace and a little bit of red bias tape to finish the top edge. You can also see I added a bit of interfacing to make the pocket stronger, to reinforce it. That is what interfacing does, and I'll show you a little bit more about that on the waistband. And then you can kind of see that on that top edge, I have hand stitched it closed, which I will share how I do that when I get to the waistband. So the apron is just repeating over and over the same principles. So I'm going to stitch 3 edges now, because of course we leave the top free to slide in the things that we want to carry with us.
In terms of the waistband, you remember I had those 2 long strips of fabric. Now, one way that you can do it is join the edges of the 2 long strips together and sew up a seam, and that'll make a waistband. But you will have a center seam right at your midriff. So if you don't want to do that, you can cut off a section. Okay, so we have this, and this basically, for me, is just a little bit past the sides. So then when I go to join the ties, they're going to be on the side and not so noticeable. Now on this piece on the back, you can see that I've added some interfacing to it, and that is just, as I said, to reinforce it. This gets a lot of wear, and the pressure on the fabric, because that is what is holding the apron up. So this is just iron-on interfacing that I've added, strictly optional. But what I'm going to do next is on either end of the long strip, I'm going to sew the longer ties. Now, because this is plaid, I'm going to pay attention in lining up my plaid lines. I have attached the ties to the center front waistband, and the next step is to now pull the gathering stitches tightly until the skirt section of the apron meets that seam. And so basically I always make a mark as to where the center is on the waistband as well as the center on the skirt. You can see on this side I've pulled up the gathering stitches and then I pull it in place. So then once it's sewn, you kind of get the idea. So this side is done. So I just did the edge of the apron to that seam.
And now I'm going to repeat the process on this side. The apron has been gathered onto the waistband. Again, the end of the apron is joined at the seam, and so then the gathering stitches were pulled to fit that length of waistband. It was not gathered to the ties. So what I'm going to do right now then, using a 5/8 inch seam allowance, I'm going to stitch this waistband area, and then I'm going to press that seam out really well. For the next step, you want to lay the apron out, and this is right side up. You're going to fold the waistband right here. We're not going to pin this section, but we are going to pin the ties, and that's all the way down. And then we're going to do a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, or 1/2 inch. You just want it to match whatever seam allowance you did when you attached the waistband to the skirt. So I did 5/8 of an inch. So I'm going to start on the corner, and I'm going to sew all the way down this tie. And you can see my last pin is right at the edge of the skirt. So I've already done this side. You can see the stitches, I think. Can you see them? And then it goes all the way to where the waistband begins, near this front section. And so my next step after I've sewn the second tie is I'm going to trim the corners, and either using a safety pin or a dowel, you want to push this right side out through here. And I will link to the video where I show you my technique for doing this. There's a number of ways that you can do it, but it's real quick and fast, and we're almost in the home stretch. The ties have been turned inside out and given a good pressing on either side. And this section of the waistband is still open. This is the inside of the apron. This is the exterior. So we just need to hand stitch this section closed. And you can see that I've added some pins. It's easy with plaid to create a straight line or a measurement as to how wide the waistband should be. If you have a plain fabric or a floral fabric, you can use a measuring tape or a seam gauge to determine how wide to make the waistband. But again, you're folding it over to enclose that raw edge right there, and then pinning it in place, and then I'm just going to stitch along here. I have about an arm length of thread, and it is knotted on one end, and basically I just pick up a small section of the apron skirt right along the edge to the waistband, and I'm pulling it all the way through. Again, I've knotted that end, so I'm going to tuck in the little tail that I have, and again, just picking up a little bit of the skirt fabric, which is right up against the waistband, and picking up a little bit of the waistband fabric, and then pulling it.
Little bit of the waistband fabric. And because it's so small, such a small amount on the skirt, and the skirt is gathered, this results in a hem that is almost invisible. So I'm just going to keep on doing this until it's finished.
The apron is finished and I will be wearing it this weekend at the Victorian Candlelight event in the Dallas area at Old City Park. And the pocket is generous and deep enough to hold my cell phone and keys so that I look historically accurate. I like it. It's fun.
I'd love to hear if you make your own apron, and there are several ways to tag me, Instagram, and of course on my website. And over on my website, I'll have additional photos, instructions, and some historical references that may help you in creating your own apron. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up button, which is right down below. Next week, we will have the final installment in A Little Women Holiday. And I'll be joined by some of my friends in some wonderful merrymaking. You won't want to miss it, so you may want to hit the subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day.